Hello, welcome to our web development tutorial series on Turbo 360. In this tutorial, we're going to create a simple React app, but we're also going to integrate it with a Node Express server because that's a much more realistic situation than just a pure React frontend. So this React project will have a server integrated with it from which we will query for the data. And this will make it much more closer to what you should expect in a professional context than just a pure React client-side frontend. My name is Dan. I will be the instructor for this tutorial. And, um, and yeah, let's get started. So increasingly, you may have heard this expression called the MERN stack. MERN is an acronym which stands for Mongo, Express, React, and Node. In this tutorial, we're going to cover the E, R, and the N, Express, React, and Node. The MERN stack is definitely growing. It's taking over the software world. One of the reasons for that is because it uses JavaScript on the front end as well as the back end. So React is a JavaScript library, and Node Express is also a JavaScript environment. Node is called the runtime, Express is the web framework, and it's all written in JavaScript. It's a great skill to learn today because it's going to be relevant for quite some time. It's still growing, still very popular, and it's very stable. It's very performant, and it's amongst big companies and small startups. The MERN stack is becoming the de facto standard on the web. So in this tutorial, what we're going to do is create a React project, which shows a blog, so a list of blog posts, and we're going to query our Node server for that blog data. It's going to show a list of our most recent blog posts, and then we're going to render individual blog posts on their own page. Now, we're not going to create entire blog posts. Obviously, we're going to just create some basic sample data. We'll probably just copy and paste it, but it'll basically serve as a simple blog using React and Node for the server. So this is a beginner tutorial, but it's not for absolute beginners in that if you've never programmed before in your entire life, this is going to be a bit too much too soon. But this should be good for beginners with maybe less than a year of personal experience through tutorials and self-study and things like that. So you should already have a basic understanding of JavaScript. You should know the relevant concepts, programming concepts for beginners there, like what's a variable, what's an array, what's a loop, things of that sort. If you've been studying JavaScript lately, you should be looking at ES6 syntax as opposed to ES5. ES6 is the de facto standard of the JavaScript today, so it wouldn't be normal to even see a lot of ES5 anymore. But just in case, make sure you're looking at an ES6 based tutorial. Also, it would be good to know certain concepts about how the web works. For example, client-server architecture and what's a REST API and JSON, which stands for JavaScript Object Notation. These things are good to know, but it's not necessarily crucial for this tutorial. It would help, but if you don't know those concepts like a REST API, you can still get by as long as you know basic JavaScript and rudimentary coding concepts like a loop and an array. So that's it. Let's go ahead and make sure our environment is set up, and we can go ahead and get started. So first thing we want to do is make sure your environment has the proper tools and libraries installed on your machine. So the very first thing we're going to need is Node.js. So head over to nodejs.org on your browser and download the LTS if you don't already have Node. And along with Node, when you install this, comes another package called npm, the Node Package Manager. So you actually get two things here for one. So here I am in my terminal. I'm using a Mac OS. If you have a Windows, you want to find your command prompt. And the first thing I'm going to do is check my Node version. So that's node-v. And I'm running 10.16.3, which is the LTS version right here. It's good to download the LTS because it's usually more stable. The S actually stands for stable. And check your npm as well. So that's npm-v. And we should be good to go there. We also need a couple more packages installed via npm. So we're going to install another package called sudo npm install -g, and we're going to install the turbo CLI. So the turbo CLI gives us a tool which can scaffold React projects quickly and easily. It also connects our environment to the Turbo environment, which is basically a free hosting platform where we can deploy our projects. So in this tutorial, we're going to do exactly that. We're going to deploy our projects. So, and that will go on the Turbo CLI, and it's all free. It'll just be an easy way to get our project live on a staging server in the real internet, so to speak. So go ahead and do that. Once you do that, you can check your Turbo version by doing Turbo version, and I am running this version right here. So make sure you have a version of this number or higher. So if you have Turbo installed from a previous tutorial, it's worth doing it again just to make sure you have the most up-to-date version. And then next we also need a couple more packages. We need to install Webpack. Webpack is called the bundling tool, which React uses to bundle our code. So we need to install, actually I forgot the -G, so don't forget that. This is a global installation. So make sure you have Webpack installed on your global machine. And then after you do that, we also need to install what's called the Webpack CLI. So we want to do sudo npm install -G Webpack CLI, like that. So you actually need those two packages to properly run Webpack on your environment. The reason I'm not doing that right now is because I've already done it, so I already have those packages installed on my machine. And last but not least, we need to install sudo npm install -G gulp, which is a task manager, a task runner, which we may or may not use in this tutorial, but it's good to have anyway, because we may run some gulp tasks when we deploy our projects. So go ahead and install that just to make sure you have it, but we may not end up using it. Webpack and Webpack CLI we will definitely use. So make sure you have this as well as the Turbo CLI, and we should be good to go. And as I mentioned earlier, the Turbo CLI gives us a liaison to a staging environment where we can deploy our projects. But before you do that, you need to actually create an account on that. And we're going to use a deployment environment called Vertex. So head over to vertex360.co. And what this is a platform where you can deploy Node Express projects that other people can then duplicate or clone and then pull down to their own environments. So we're going to do that in this tutorial. We're going to clone a project from the Vertex environment, which will be a Node Express backend, and then we're going to pull that down and then integrate a React client-side front end using that Node Express backend. The reason we're going to do that rather than building it up from scratch is because then this would become more of a Node Express tutorial rather than a React tutorial. So we're not going to create the entire Node Express project from scratch. Otherwise, this would become a Node Express tutorial. However, we're going to use that to integrate. We're going to clone our project from here and then integrate the React client-side front end throughout the duration of this tutorial and then redeploy that to the staging environment. So let's go ahead and start with that right now. So make sure you create an account here on Vertex, and then the next thing you're going to do is head over to the community link. So when you create an account, you're going to see something like this. And then you want to head to the community link, and then we want to find Turbo 360. So this is an account on Vertex right here that I created specifically for this tutorial. So click on Turbo 360, and then over here, click on Sites right here, and then React Project Backend. This is the one we're going to use, and this is going to be our Node Express server, so that we can go ahead and clone that and then pull it down into our local environment and then add a React front end. So let's go ahead and do that. So let's call this my React blog and go ahead and launch that. And what it's doing right now is it's taking this project and relaunching it on your account. And then once we have that up and running, we will be able to pull down the source code and integrate our React code into the front end, into the back end, excuse me, the Node Express server. So here's what we see after we clone the project. And if we click on this back button right here, we will be looking at the admin dashboard for our project. And what we want to do next is download the source code right here. So we click on source code, and this is the source code for our project. And so it actually downloaded two files, the package.zip and the env text file. So we need both of those. So I'm going to pull that over into my desktop, and then let's change the name to my React blog, and let's unzip this. And when you open this up, you're going to see a Node Express project. This is a fully functional Node Express project with a block configuration and whatnot. But it has no React integration yet, which is what we're going to do as we move forward in this tutorial. So this is the code base we're going to begin with. This is going to be our Node Express server. And in the next video, we're going to step through this code and make sure we understand how this is properly architected, and then we're going to start actually building in the React code into this project. So hopefully you got all this working, and in the next video we'll start digging into this code and start integrating the actual React code base. So that's it for now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in part 2. Hello, and welcome to part 2 of our React with Node and Express server series here on Turbo 360. In part 1, we set up our local environment. We installed Node and a couple other packages to make sure we have everything we need to run the project. And then we also cloned a project from the Vertex platform, which contains our Node Express server already configured, as well as with some options pre-configured for React, so that we can get right into the code without spending too much time on configuration and installing more libraries and packages and things like that. So in this part, we're going to do exactly that. We're going to open up the code, get everything running, get the Node Express server going, and make sure we understand how that's organized, and then start inserting some React code and get the actual React project integrated into the code base. So let's go ahead and get started. So here I am at the end of the last video, and here is the folder that we downloaded and unzipped. And keep in mind it downloaded two files, so keep that in mind, the env text file. So we're going to need that too. So first thing we're going to do is cd into the code, the folder with the code. So my React blog. And let's open that up in our text editor. So I'm using Atom. Of course, you're free to use whatever you want, Visual Studio Code or Sublime or whatever you prefer. I'm just using Atom out of habit. So here is our Node Express server code. It looks like there might be a lot going on here, but it's mostly a basic Node Express project with a couple other options and configurations for React. So this is ready to go for a React integration. The important takeaways here is that this is a basic Node Express project with what's called a REST API already configured for blog posts. To begin, we're going to look at the package.json. And if you're completely new to Node and Express in general, you're going to find that the package.json is where a project is typically organized. And for now, the most important thing here is the dependencies. So almost every Node project has a list of dependencies, which are basically packages that need to be installed in order for the project to run properly. And those dependencies in this case are listed right here. And so we need to install these dependencies. And those dependencies go into a folder called the Node Modules folder. So what we're going to do is reinstall these dependencies to give us a totally clean install. So the way we're going to do that is head over to the code base in our Finder. We're going to remove the Node modules. And then we're going to open up our terminal. Make sure you're in the root directory of the project. And then we're going to do npm install. And this command simply tells npm, the Node package manager, to head over to the dependencies entry of the package.json and just go through the list and install each one. So that's what we're going to do right now, so that we have a clean install of the dependencies of this project. And once we do that, we should be able to run the project. So right now it's going through all these dependencies and installing each one. Usually this takes around 30 to 60 seconds, not that long. And then once this is done, we should be good to go. And again, this project is already configured for React integration. So with React in particular, setting up a project can be quite onerous. There's a lot of things to configure off the bat, um, and that alone can take a long time. So we're using this code base, this project foundation, to sort of bypass a lot of that and get right into the actual React code. So this saves a lot of time. So the installs are done. And now we can go ahead and run the project. Now you may recall in video 1 we installed a CLI called the Turbo CLI. Amongst the things that gives us is a local development server. So to run that we simply do turbo dev server, and this should give us a confirmation in a second saying the server is running on localhost 3000. So we just copy that right here and we open that up in our browser, and we should see this, welcome to Vertex, which if you recall from the first video when we created the project, it looks the same. So if I click on view site here from Vertex, I see the same thing on my staging server as I do in my local host because they're the same project. So here, this staging link right here is eventually where we're going to deploy our project. So this is where our project is going to eventually live on a live server. Obviously your link should be different than mine, but that's the idea behind Vertex. So good, everything here is working. If we reload the local host, everything here looks the same. So we can now turn off the server by doing Control C, and the server is now off. So if I reload localhost, I should get the error message because the server has been turned off. And let's take care of one last detail, which is the env file. So you may recall when we downloaded the source code, we downloaded two files, the zip file and the env file. So we didn't make any use of this yet. This is an environment variables file. And basically what this file does is it enables us to connect our local code here to our remote server environment here so that when we deploy, it basically knows where to go. So let's go ahead and configure that right now just to get it out of the way. So the way you do that is you head over to your root directory and you create an env file, and that's a hidden file. So we do touch and then .env, and this dot right here is what makes it a hidden file. So we see it here, .env, but if you actually open up the folder itself, you don't see it anywhere, and that's what makes it hidden. And we open up our env text file, and we just copy the whole thing and paste it in right here, and that's it. And now we have our env environment variables configuration all set to go. And what that does is when we deploy our projects, it'll know where to point the server so that it'll connect to a live staging environment on the Vertex platform. So good, our environment is all set, our code is running, everything is set to go. Let's step through the code real quick just to make sure we understand the underlying architecture. So I'm going to run the server again. So turbo dev server. And then reload localhost 3000. And so the page you're looking at here is delivered in basically through two directories, the routes directory, which is right here, and the views directory, which is right here. So the views directory is where the HTML files are stored to render each view. So if I open up the views directory, you're going to see basically just one file, and don't worry about the partials right now, but this one file is called index.mustache. And if I double click on this, you're going to see some HTML code like here, welcome to Vertex 360, and that's this right here. So if I say hello world, and save that and then reload, you should see that change, and that worked properly. Now this file, this index.mustache file, which is again just an HTML file, this is rendered through the routes directory. So if I open up the routes file, you'll see two route files. The one that we care about is page.js, and this is the route that's servicing the home page. So specifically, this These 4 lines right here, 7 through 10, is the route that is rendering the home page right here. And on line 9 in particular, where it says index right here, this is where it's referring to the index.mustache file in the views directory. And this is a pretty conventional Node Express way of organizing your routes and your views, what's called your templates. And so this is called a template, the index template, and this route is rendering the index template as specified in line 9 right here. So that's how the organization is structured. And so what we're going to do next is we're going to integrate a React source code to render here instead of just the raw HTML. So the first thing we're going to do is create a new template. Let's call that, I'm going to turn off the server. I'm going to create a new template by navigating to the views directory. And let's call that, I want to create a new file, and let's call it home. And then this is a mustache extension. Mustache is called a templating engine. It's simply a way to insert dynamic data into HTML files. So you can just think of this as an HTML file and it'll be fine. It's pretty much a de facto HTML file anyway. And so here inside the home mustache, let's start writing some HTML. So I'm going to create HTML, an HTML tag. I'm going to create a head tag, but leave it empty for now. We'll probably add some stuff to it later. And then a body tag, which is where our main content is going to go. And then I'm going to create a header1 tag. Which is going to say, welcome to my React blog. And then let's render this template instead of the index.mustache. So if you recall in the page.js, on line 9, this is where we determine which template to show up on the home page. Instead of index, we're going to change that to home. And then we're going to go back to our terminal and run the dev server. And then reload localhost, and it says welcome to my React blog. So that's all set to go. And so now we have a new template, the home.mustache, which is where we're going to actually mount the React code. So that's all set to go. So in the next video, we're going to start actually cranking out the React code, set up the React code base, and so that we can render React code here instead of raw HTML like we're doing right here instead. So hopefully you got all that working. And in the next video, we're going to start actually setting up the React code base. So stay tuned for that, and thanks for watching. Hello, and welcome to part 3 of our React with Node Express Server series here on Turbo 360. In part 2, we set up our Node Express project. We got everything running locally, made sure everything was properly working, and we added a new template so that we control the main UI, so that eventually that template will render the React code, and we now have everything set up locally so that we control everything in the Node Express environment. So in this video, we're going to start the actual React code and render some basic React UI on top of the template that we created at the end of video 2. So let's go ahead and get started. So here I am at the end of video 2. I'm going to run the dev server again and just make sure everything still works. So I'm going to run turbo dev server. And head over to my browser and reload, and everything is still working properly here. So we're good to go. So I'm going to turn off my server now, and up until now, everything is still just a regular conventional Node Express project. So now let's begin integrating our React source code. So I'm going to collapse these folders, and I'm going to create a new directory in my terminal called src. So in the root level of the project, let's create a new directory. So make dir and then src. And this is where all the React code is going to go. So we want to cd into the src directory. and then we want to create an entry point for our React app. So sometimes it's called app.js, sometimes it's called index.js. It's really up to you. Um, but I'm going to call it index.js. So touch index.js. In this project, actually, we're going to have to go with index, and I'll explain why in a few minutes. But sometimes in other projects, you might see it called app.js. It's basically the same thing. So, and I'm going to cd back to the root level of the project because this is where you want to be most of the time anyway, so it's easy to forget that. And now let's open up our src and then the index.js. I'm going to get rid of all these other files too, just so they don't get in the way. And let's begin hammering out some React code. So the first thing we need to do, of course, is import React. So import React, and then we're also going to import a submodule from the React library called component, and that's going to come from the React library. And then we need to create a class called app, and this is going to extend, so this is basically subclassing the component class like that. So right now we're creating what's called a React component. And a component is basically a visual building block that we use to create React UIs. So the building block is essentially a visual definition. It's kind of like a Lego piece that we can use again and again within our React UI in a modular fashion. So we have to override one method, one function to make our React component valid, and that function is render. And this function here has to return the visual definition of this component. So that's essentially HTML. Technically, this is what's called JSX, but you can think of it as like a variant of HTML. And this is the React entry point. Let's just call it React app. Okay, and then this is going to be the visual definition of this component every time I use it. So every time I use this component elsewhere, it's going to show this visual structure, this visual HTML. And then what I want to do next is I have to import something called the React DOM, and that comes from the React DOM library. And we use this to mount the code onto the HTML file. So we go down here and we do React DOM hydrate, and this is the command that will take our React code and mount it on to our home mustache file, which we will do next. So we do hydrate and then app. So we are taking this component and we're going to mount it onto the document get element by ID and then root. So what this means right here is that we are going to take our app component and then render it inside the document. In this case, that's going to be the home.mustache file by taking over the div with the ID of root, which we don't have yet. So we want to go here to the home.mustache and remove this and replace it with a div whose ID is root. So what React will do is it will take this ID and replace its inside contents with this right here. That's essentially how client-side rendering works. That's how most modern client-side libraries work, like Angular 4 or 5 or Vue.js. They all work in this fashion now. So that's how that's going to happen, but right now it's not properly set up yet. What we need to do now is compile the code. So right now what we're looking at is some basic ES6 code as well as what's called JSX. And unfortunately, most browsers can't run that. So we have to compile this code, or what's called transpile the code, into raw ES5 JavaScript. And that is done through Webpack. And so you'll see down here at the bottom, there's a Webpack config file already set up. And that's one of the reasons why we cloned this project, so we can have some basic configuration already set up without doing all that from the bottom up, which would take a lot of time. So if we look at the Webpack config, there's a lot going on here, but there's really only two lines that matter the most. Line 8 is where the Webpack finds the entry point of the React app. So you'll see an src index.js file. Excuse me. And that's a direct reference to the src index.js. And that's why I said earlier it has to be index.js rather than app.js. So if you want to change it to app.js, that's fine. You can go right ahead and do that, but don't forget to do it over here as well. And what Webpack is going to do is it's going to find this entry point and then take whatever code is inside there, in this case, this code, and transpile it into ES5 code, and then put the results in the output file line, line 11. Actually, these two are indented wrong. It should be like that. And so line 11 dictates where the output file will go. So in this case, the public directory /ds, D-I-S-T, dist. So public and then dist. Now there is no dist directory here, so Webpack will create that for us when the transpile is complete. And everything else below that is just details of how to do the transpiling. So for this tutorial, you don't need to worry about it. Again, all that really matters right now is line 8 is where we find the entry point of the React code, and line 11 where the output code will go. So now what we need to do is actually run the Webpack transpiler so that this outputted code is generated. So we have to go back to our terminal in order to do that. And again, make sure you're in the root directory. And here we have to run Webpack by just running the Webpack command. And that's why we installed the Webpack CLI in video 1 so that we have the Webpack program on our machine to do that. So what we do is we run Webpack, and then -d for what's called development. And then go ahead and execute that command. And this usually takes a couple seconds. And when that's done, you should get this output right here saying, confirmation saying this has been complete. And then if you look at here, you'll see a new directory called dist, and then bundle, and then app.js. And this is where the outputted code was inserted, just like it said, public, dist, and then bundle, and then app.js. And it's called app.js because on line 8, it's called app right here. So if I change that to something else like index or entry, it would say index.js or entry.js. And that's how all this is configured. So now we have our compiled code right here, our transpiled code. And this is the code that we actually execute in the browser. So if I go back here and I run the dev server, and I reload the home page, you're not going to see anything because we have a root ID like that with no React code. There's no importation of our React code. So what we need to do next is import this file into here as a JavaScript file. So we do that down here at the bottom of the body tag. We create a script tag, and we specify the src to be dist and then bundle, dist, bundle, and then app.js. Now you may be wondering why public is not part of that, because the public directory is by default the root directory of all static assets. So this public directory is implicit. It's already sort of assumed to go into the public directory. So now what we've done is we've imported the app.js file from the dist and bundle subdirectory in here like that. And that's it. So now what we can do is reload, and we see this is the React app. And that is the entry point that we wrote right here in our app component. So we have successfully mounted our React code onto the template that we created for this, specifically for this project. Now I don't want to get too deep into Webpack because that can get a little bit confusing, but let's say for example I do want to change some of the basic configurations. So I'm going to turn off the server, and instead of bundle and app.js, let's say I want to change this to index. and then app. And then let's get rid of this dist directory. So instead of bundle and then app.js, I want to create an app directory and then call the entry point index.js. So what I can do here is go back to my terminal and do webpack-d and rerun webpack, but this time the output files will be under a different name, under a different directory with a different name. So now it is dist app and then index.js. And so if I run the dev server and reload, you'll see it's not going to work anymore because the file names have changed. So I go back here and I do app and then index.js. Now you might want to do that because the naming convention here, the name of this file here correlates to the name of this file here, so it's easier to see what goes with what. That's up to you. Really, whatever you want to do is fine. The main point here was to show how Webpack determines the output files that are written here. And that's about as far as I'm going to go with Webpack because Webpack can get very, very confusing. So this is as much as I want to explain as far as how Webpack interacts with the React code. But it's good to know what it does. You should not be completely unfamiliar with Webpack because in a lot of professional projects, and at least in my case, in all of my professional projects that involve React and Redux, I have to do a lot of work with Webpack. So you want to at least have a basic knowledge of what's going on down here so that you can, if necessary, you can go in and make your own changes down the road. So that's it for this video. We basically established that the React code is properly set up. Here is the React output again. We compiled the code to our ES5 versions over here. Hello, and welcome back to our React with Node and Express tutorial series on Turbo 360. In the last video, we set up our React code base on the project, and we rendered our first React component on our home template. So we got our React code working basically. And in this video, we're going to continue with that process and start building out the React UI. So we're going to create a subcomponent where we are going to eventually render our blog posts and continue building out the actual React interface. So let's get into it. Here I am at the end of the last video, and I'm going to run the dev server and make sure everything is still properly functioning. And make sure everything looks good here. And here is the code from the last video. Okay, let's turn off the server and let's keep working on the code. So all the React code is inside this src directory, and we created this app component, which is going to be our entry point. And for the most part, the entry point of a React app usually is pretty simple. It's pretty much what it sounds like. It's an entry point. So we're going to create subcomponents that will be imported into this entry point, and we're going to render those subcomponents from the entry point instead. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's head over to our src directory, and let's create a new directory called components. And let's cd into that. And let's create a new component in here called posts. And this will be the component which renders our blog posts. So let's go ahead and create that and then cd back to the root level because this is kind of where you want to stay. That's sort of our home base. And let's open up the posts component and let's create another React app out of it. I'm sorry, another React component. So we want to import React and the component submodule. And then we're going to create a class called posts. And this will also subclass the component submodule. And remember every React component has to override the render function, and that has to return some HTML or JSX in this case. So we're going to call this, this is the posts component. Okay, and you may have noticed that this time we did not import the React DOM. That's because we're not going to directly mount this onto our template. We're going to import it into another module, specifically the app.js file right here. So instead of mounting it onto the template, we want to just export it. So we do export default and then posts. And this way we can import it into other components and render it from other components instead. So this makes it a reusable module, basically. So now we go back to our index.js, our entry point, and now we can import that from the components posts like that. So inside the entry point, the index.js, we are importing the posts from the components directory. And then rather than saying this is the React app, we can get rid of that and render the posts container instead, post component, excuse me. And then if you reload the dev server, and then reload the page, you're going to see that nothing changed. And that's because we didn't recompile the code. So remember, all this has to be transpiled into our ES5 directory here. So we didn't do that. So what we need to do is do that before we relaunch the server. So normally what I like to do is open a second window in my terminal by doing Command T, and I do webpack -d. You don't have to do this, it's just a habit that I maintain. It keeps it easier for me to stay organized with what's doing what. So now we recompiled the code, and I head back to my web terminal, and I do turbo dev server. And I can reload, and now I have, this is the post component. And that's great, so it worked. So now we have the posts component showing up in the entry point, and in here, it's its own module. So here's where we can start really laying out some more UI. So I'm going to turn off the dev server now and start laying out the UI to show the actual blog posts. So let's call this, let's see here, let's give this a header tag. And let's call it recent posts, except spell it right. And then we're going to render this in an ordered list. Actually, let's go with an unordered list. And these require a list item tag. And let's call it post 1, 2, 3, and 4. So don't forget to recompile. And rerun the dev server. Actually, you can just leave this on, to be honest. I don't know why I keep on turning it off, but okay, so now we're seeing post 1, 2, 3, and 4 in the recent post header. So now we can continue building out this UI. So everything here is properly working. Now, normally this data is held in what's called the state. So the state of a component is one area where data can be stored in a component. So there's actually two areas where data can be stored in a component. One is called state and another is called props. I mean, there's more than those two, but those are the two that really matter. And they each have their own reasons, and we'll explore each one. To begin, we're going to use the state. So basically what we have to do is set up a state object inside the component to maintain the state. So we do that by setting up what's called a constructor. And we have to call super. Don't worry too much about this for now. Just understand that you have to set up a constructor, and then inside here we set up a state object like that. And this is going to be the state of the posts component. And then here we can create a recent posts array. And this is going to be just an array of JSON objects, just regular objects. So let's create a couple objects. So let's call it title post 1. Post 2, 3, and 4. And for now, that'll be the entirety of the JSON object. This is called a JavaScript notation object, JavaScript object notation object. And eventually, we're going to fill out more details here. So instead of rendering just exactly these 4 every single time, we're going to render it from the state. So here, what we want to do is we want to iterate through this recent posts array and render a list item for each one of these posts. So we do that using the map function. So the first thing we need to do is break open a curly brace right here like that. And essentially, whatever you do inside of these curly braces, inside of a JSX syntax, is pretty much standard JavaScript. So this is you can now write pretty much standard JavaScript in here. So we're going to do this dot state and then recent posts, and then we're going to map through each of the recent posts, and that takes a function which is basically a representative of each item inside the array. And then we're going to return in here. We're going to return. Let me just get rid of these extra spaces. Inside here, we want to return a list item, li, for each post. And we want to return inside the list item the title of the post. So we do curly brace like that, and then post title. And the reason why we have another curly brace here is because we're referencing directly the JSON object. We're not hard coding the text. We're grabbing the text from the JSON object, so that this also needs to be inside of its own curly brace. And then I'm going to recompile the code. And this time I left the server on, so we don't need to worry about that. And I think it recompiled already. I'm going to do it one more time because I lost track of it. There it is. And then if I reload, I'll see the same thing because I only have 4 posts again. So if I add one more into the state, and do post 5, and I can rerun the transpiler, rerun Webpack. This time I should see post 5 on the server. And that's it. And so that worked. So we are now referencing the data from the state. Now there's a couple small details worth pointing out here. If I open the console editor in my browser by doing Option Command I if you're using Chrome, you're going to see an error message right here. Each child in an array or iterator should have a unique key prop. This is a React thing. Basically, whenever you loop through an array or a list of items, like we're doing right here, there has to be a key property inside the actual item you return. So we should do key equals post title, like that. And then that'll take care of this error right here. Now this key value has to be unique. That's why it says a unique key prop. So instead of title, typically what's done is the ID. So every post is going to have an ID property. So I'm just going to give it the index of the array. One, two, three, four. And then this is going to be post.id instead. And this is a more conventional way of handling the unique key property in any kind of iteration in JSX and React. So let's go ahead and rerun the Webpack. And then reload the server. And we're still seeing the same posts, but that error has now gone away. And don't worry about this one right here. It's not a big deal. We'll take care of that when we bundle our code for production. So this is now good to go. And so now we have our posts post component rendering some posts from the state. So that is now all set. But in reality, these should come from a server. And that is really the traditional way of handling this kind of data. So we already have a Node Express server set up in this project. That's why we copied it from the Vertex template. And it already has support for blog posts. And so in the next video, we're going to explore how that's connected. And then we're going to actually query the server for these blog posts and render that here instead of what's statically listed in the state. So you may have noticed that even so, right here, this really is static code because we can't change this once we've compiled the code. And so a server is really meant to handle, make this more dynamic. So in the next video, we're going to connect it to our server and going to make sure everything is properly rendering from the server data instead of the statically inserted data inside the state right here. So hopefully you got everything working. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Hey there, and welcome back to the React with Node and Express tutorial series on Turbo 360. In the previous video, we set up a component to render the recent posts on the website, and right now it's rendering a static list of posts that we stored in the state of the component. So in this video, we're going to continue that process by adding posts to the actual server so that our React side can make a request to the server and get posts from the backend rather than a static list in the component itself. So in this video, we're going to do that. We're going to set up some posts on the actual server and then start integrating the React with the Node Express server side as well. So let's get started. So here I am at the end of the last video, and I have the server running right here. I'm going to rerun the server and reload the page, make sure everything still works fine. And let's open up the code. And here is where we left off in the code. So like I was saying, these posts right here in the state should come from a server API call. So the project that we cloned in the beginning of this tutorial comes with all of that already configured. If we dismiss this code and take a look at the backend organization, we can see how this looks. So it starts here with the models, and you'll see two files in the models directory, one for post and one for video. We're only going to focus on the post one right now, and here is a schema for a blog post. Well, we have an image, a title, a preview, category, the text, so forth and so on. A lot of stuff. Most of this we're not going to use. We're just going to use the title, the image, and the preview. And this is all set to go because of the project that we cloned from video 1, so we don't have to do everything from the bottom up. Now this data, this post data, as well as the video data, is delivered through a REST API that is also already built in to the project. So if you run the server, which I'm still running, and reload the page, here I'll show you how the REST API is structured. So basically the way it works is we can append an API to the URL like that, and then post for blog post, and this API endpoint, this URL, will return every blog post currently stored in the system, and that's the payload, the response. And right now we're getting an empty array because we don't have any blog posts, so that's a problem. So we need to create a few blog posts. So the way we can do that is by going back to our Vertex admin dashboard, and here's the project I have set up for that, and click on configuration. And this project, as well as every Vertex project, automatically comes with a CMS, a content management system, where we can add blog posts and videos and whatever other data the project supports. So again, in this case, the only two models, the only two types of data are post, blog post, and videos. So we can click on CMS, and you'll see post and video. We're not going to worry about video, we're only going to focus on post, and we're going to add a post. So I already have a couple images set aside for this, so you may want to pause the video right now and find a few images. I just grabbed a couple images of React from a Google image search, and this should be good for demonstration purposes. So here I'm going to upload one of the images. Right here. And React is, whoops, React is great. Software. And for the actual text, I'm going to head over to a website called loreipsum.net, which just gives us some formatted text we can copy and paste. So I'm going to copy this to the clipboard and then head back to my CMS editor and paste it in right here. And then I'm also going to grab the first 2 lines like that. I'm going to copy that, and this will be my preview like that. And this is going to be our first blog post. So I can create the post and then post created. And now we have our first blog post on the project. So if I click on view site and I go to the same API/post endpoint, I will now see that post coming from the API call. And that's how that works. So I'm going to add one more just so we have a couple posts. So I'm going to add post again. And I'm going to upload the other image I stored for this. So that's going to be the blue one. Well, actually, they're both blue, but it's going to be this one right here. Let's call this Getting Started with React. And I'm going to copy the lorem ipsum text again. And this time I'm going to copy 2 other lines so that the previews aren't exactly the same. And then I'm going to create that blog post. So now we have 2 blog posts on the server. So if I do an API call for the post, you'll see 1 and then 2. And so that is now set to go. So the problem is we don't have that running on local. So what we have to do now is sync up our local database with the staging database. That's pretty easy. Here's what you do. So you go back to your terminal and you turn off the server, Control C, and then you do npm run reset. And this will clear the local database. So the local database has now been cleared. It's empty. So when I run the dev server, what this will do is that whenever I make a query for the post, it will fetch the data from the staging server and then sync it up to the local server. So here's what I mean. If I reload the localhost API post call, it is now synced up with the staging server. And the reason that works is because these 2 projects have been connected. They're synced up. You may recall during video 1, in the env file, we copied and pasted some contents, and this data here indicates where to fetch the data to sync up the databases. So now our local database is synced up to our staging database, and now we have some data to work with. And so here we go. And so what we can do now is make this API query in the post container. I'm sorry, component. I keep on calling it a container because it's a type of component. So what we're going to do is open up src components and then posts. And then inside the posts component, we can query this API endpoint and grab the data from the server rather than storing it right here in state. So let's go ahead and get that started. So I'm going to turn off the server. And what we want to do is override what's called a lifecycle method in a component. Lifecycle methods are functions that components fire off at certain key events at the component's lifecycle. So for example, when it gets created, when it's about to show up, when it does show up, when when it's about to go away, when it's about to disappear. These are called life cycle methods. And the one we're going to use, we're going to override is component did mount, and that should be a lowercase c. And this is a lifecycle method that gets automatically triggered when the component shows up. So did mount basically means shows up. So if I do a console log, this should just appear every time the component shows up. So let's go ahead and test that out. Now I'm going to rerun Webpack, but you may have noticed that running Webpack every time you make a change can become a little bit cumbersome. So what we do to take care of that is we add another flag here called -w, which stands for watch. And what that means is Webpack will basically just stay running in the background. And that way, whenever you make a change, Webpack will automatically recompile, so you don't have to constantly think about it. And then I'm going to run the dev server. So in reality, you can keep the dev server and Webpack both running at the same time and really never have to restart. So that's up to you whether or not you want to do that. It's really a matter of personal preference. So I'm going to head over to the home page, and here I still see the same thing. But if I open the console, you will now see component did mount. And if I reload it, you'll see it again. So right here is where I can make an API call, particularly this API call. So let's head back here, and let's use the fetch API to do that. So the fetch API is a built-in module in JavaScript that you can use to make API calls. It's kind of like a more modernized version of AJAX calls or HTTP request. So here we do API post, and this returns what's called a promise, and that will return a response. And then let's have it do that. I'll explain all this in a second. I'm just going to finish out the code real quick. Okay, so right here we're making a fetch API call to the API endpoint that I pointed out earlier, and that's going to return a response. Now this response has to be parsed according to the data type, and the data type that the API returns this is called JSON. This is JSON data. And by the way, if your JSON response doesn't look formatted like this, I'm using a Chrome plugin. You can just look it up, Chrome JSON formatter, and it's this one right here. You can just go ahead and install that, and your JSON results should look nice and formatted like mine. So yeah, just make sure this is the one you have. So what we want to do is we want to take this response and parse the JSON. So we do return and then response.json. And then this data right here is the actual data we get from the server data. And then here I'm just going to console log that. Now I'm doing JSON stringify because this is supposed to be a JSON object, which is not a string. So basically what we're doing here with the JSON.stringify is converting the JSON object into a string so that we can read it when it pops out here. So hopefully that'll show up properly. And here is the data from our server. You can see confirmation success, data, and then the array. That's the same thing you see over here. Confirmation success, data, and then the array. And so that worked. So what we want to do is check for the confirmation first. So what we do next here is we do if data confirmation is not success, then something went wrong. Something went wrong. And we want to throw an alert. I'm sorry, an error, my mistake. And we want to put in an error message. So something went wrong. And if this happens, it'll immediately go to this catch block. So anytime there's an error or anytime something goes wrong, the catch block is what triggers right away. And so this will trigger the catch block. And that's how this promise architecture is organized. In this case, down here, that means everything went right. So I'm going to put another console log and say, call it posts. And that's going to be inside the data key. So we're calling this data, so that we're right here, we're going to have to call it data.data. It's really not a good idea though. So I'm going to call this payload. We'll have better variable naming here. So payload, and then let's call this posts, and then that's going to be payload.data. And then let's console log the posts. And so now we should only see an array. So if I reload, whoop, something went wrong. So I probably forgot a data key somewhere. So let's see here, payload. Let's see what we get. So console log payload. I see what you see. I don't know if you caught that, but I have 3 S's here. So I misspelled success. And in reality, it should be obviously 2 S's. So there's my mistake. Silly, silly, silly. Okay, so hopefully that fixes that. And so now we have our confirmation. And let's go ahead and make sure we're seeing this posts console log. And here we are. So this is an array of posts that are now coming from the server. So what we want to do is get rid of the posts from the state right here, recent posts, because we don't want to use that data. We want to use the server data. And then next thing we want to do is take this posts from the server and do this dot set state, and then reset the recent posts key to posts. And what this set state command will do is it will trigger a re-render. So this component will actually render twice. The first time it'll render with an empty posts array, and then the second time it'll render with the posts from the server. So if I reload that, now I have 2 posts that are synced up with the server data. Getting started with React, and React is great. And if I look at the server data, I have getting started with React, and React is great. And so that's it. That worked. And so now we have the data coming from the server rather than storing it locally in state, which obviously means we can add data to the server, remove data, make changes. We can do whatever we want. We can change the image, edit a post, etc. And that should be reflected here, especially when we deploy. So now we've connected our components to our server. I'm going to remove this console log. And you may have noticed also I have not been reloading the server. I have not been rerunning Webpack. That's because all along Webpack has been keeping track. The dev server's been running the whole time. Everything has been sort of maintaining itself on the terminal. So that's good. It makes the workflow a little bit easier. And now we have the data showing up over here from the server. So that's good. So also you may have noticed when we set up our blog posts, we have a lot more stuff, right? We have the image, the title, the preview, the category, the actual post text. So we want to make use of all that. So over here, we want to fill this out a little bit more in the next video. We want to show the image, a small preview, going to show the date when it was posted and whatnot, and then fill this out a little bit more from a UI standpoint. So yeah, hopefully you got all that working. We finally have some client-server communication going on, so that's good. And hopefully you're saying the same thing on your end. And yeah, that's it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Hello, and welcome back to the React with Node and Express Server tutorial series on Turbo 360. In the previous video, we set up the posts container component to show posts from the actual server, and we rendered those on our React UI. So in this video, we want to add a little bit of more detail to those posts. For example, we have a date and image. We uploaded images for each one of these posts and a preview text as well. So I want to add a little bit more detail to the actual UI so that it looks a little bit more filled out. So let's get into it. So here I am at the end of the last video, and this is what the UI looks like right now. I'm going to run the dev server. And here we are. So these posts, these are the two current posts in the back end, and you know, a real blog should have a little bit more detail here, right? So let's go ahead and open up our code and head back to the post component right here, posts, excuse me. And right here is where we are rendering, iterating through the posts and then rendering each individual post title. So I'm going to create a little bit more space here by putting this in parentheses like that. And then this is going to let me add some more lines here. And I'm going to put this post title inside of its own div. And that should probably have its own header tag. So I'm going to give it an h3 tag, which is a little bit smaller than h1 and h2. And let's see how that comes out. Let's see, what did I do wrong here? So Webpack is crashing. So you may have noticed I made a mistake in my JSX. I have h3 paired up with an h2 closing tag. So that's obviously incorrect. And whenever you make a mistake like that on JSX inside of your React code, your Webpack will crash. And hopefully it'll give you some sort of indication of what went wrong. And then just basically just fix it, and we're back in business. So here we go. Okay, so now we have our two posts, the titles for each one. And what we're going to do next is add some more detail. So if you look at the models directory and open up the post model schema, I'm going to get rid of all this explainer text because we don't really need it right now. You'll see all the attributes that we have inside of each post. So we have an image, title, preview, etc., etc. We're going to use the image, and let's put the image on top of each one. So let's head over to our posts component and put the image right here. So that will be img, and this is going to be post image. And let's see what that gives us. And now we have the images with each post. So let's see here. So it's a little bit big, and let's take advantage of a feature that comes with the Vertex image hosting platform where we can crop these images by adding a parameter. So all we have to do here is do plus. Well, let me show you how it works first. So if I copy the image address and I paste it in, I have the image right here in its full form. If I go to the end of the URL and I do equals s120, it'll give me a smaller version of the image in which the maximum width is 120 pixels. And if I do a -c at the end, it'll give me a perfect square of 120 by 120. So this makes it very convenient to create a standardized image size no matter what the user uploads, because you can always just add those parameters at the end. So I'm going to do equals s120-c to guarantee that the image will be perfect square on both. And let's see what else. I'm going to use a flex display here. So style display equals flex, and that should give me side-by-side UI. There we go. And over here on the image, I'm going to do style margin right and just give it a 12 pixel space to the right. And on the div itself, I'm going to do a margin top Actually, margin bottom makes more sense here. And we're going to go 16 pixels on that. Okay, create some separation there. Let's get rid of these dots, and that's going to be a style on the list, the unordered list. And I believe that's list style type. That will be none for no dots. There we go. And let's see here. Now we have a flex display on this div, so everything will go left to right. So if I put this inside of its own div, so I'm going to put this inside of its own div like so, like that. And hopefully that won't break the UI. Let's take a look at it. Okay. Now everything I put inside this div will be stacked vertically. So what I can do is take a small tag like this, and then the date. And there we go. And then if we look at the actual post schema, you'll see that it has a date string automatically built in. I don't know if that's set. Let's take a look at what we get when we use that. Post date string. There we go. And if you're ever not sure what is actually coming back from the API, you can actually just look at the API itself. So here's everything we're getting back from the API. So we have the date string right here, we have the text, preview, title, all that stuff, image, and the ID. And so this is actually a better reference than what I was doing earlier, which is looking at the actual schema. This actually makes a lot more sense because this is literally what we're getting back from the server. So this is a better reference point. So I should have been doing that the whole time. Let's get rid of this padding on top. It's a bit much. So let's go here and do style. And that gives us a better grouping right there. And let's create a little preview text snippet down here. And if you're unfamiliar with styling in JSX and React, you may have noticed I'm doing these double curly braces. That's how you do styling in React slash JSX. And instead of using hyphenated variable names like you would see in CSS, you use camel casing. So instead of margin right like this will actually break the JSX. It'll cause the whole thing to crash. You've got to do it like this. And the implicit units is pixels, px. But if you want to use something else like REM, for example, or EM, you can just put the whole thing in quotes and do it like that. And that will be respected in the CSS. So that's how you handle styling in JSX slash React. Takes a little bit of getting used to at first, and it's definitely easy to mess up, but over time you just get used to it like anything else. So then here, let's add a preview. And let's see how that comes out. There we go. And underneath the preview, let's do a hyperlink. And read more. I'm going to do a hashtag for that. And I'm going to give that a red style text color. So color red. And yeah, I think that's good to go. And great. So now this is going to be our blog UI. This is how we're going to render our blog post. And we're going to want to actually link these to an individual page for each post. So when I click on this and the read more, the image and whatnot, all of these should go to an actual post. In fact, let's set up those hyperlinks right now. So we want to hyperlink the title and the image. So let's go ahead and do that right now. So the image is over here. Let's put the image inside the anchor tag. And let's do the same thing for the title, which is right here. So we just take the title and we do the same thing. And now these are hyperlinked. And so now what we want to do, and actually I'm going to make this image a little bit bigger so it fits within the top to bottom of the actual preview text. So let's make that a little bit bigger. So that's 120, see, let's try 160. That should give us more room. There we go, I think that looks better. And so now these are hyperlinked, but they don't go anywhere, they just go to the hashtag. So in the next video, what we're going to do is we're going to connect these to an individual page for each blog post, and the blog post itself will render that page will render the entire contents of the blog. So yeah, hopefully you got all this working. Hopefully your blog is starting to look a little bit more like an actual blog. And thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next video. Hello and welcome back to the React with Node and Express server tutorial on Turbo 360. In the previous video, we set up some basic styling for our posts page so that it looks a little bit more styled, not so plain and bland with regular text. So in this video, what we're going to do is create a separate page for an individual blog post so that when a user clicks on one of the links, they will be navigated to a page that shows the entire blog post with the image and the text and all that stuff. So yeah, that's it. Let's go ahead and get started. So here I am at the end of the previous video, and I'm going to run the dev server just to make sure everything still works as it did before. And so here we are at where we left off last time. Now these links should go to a separate page for the individual post, right? And right now they don't do that. They're just hyperlinked to hashtag. So so the way it should work is that this should go to a page that links to another URL that somehow uniquely identifies the post. If we look at the actual API call, API endpoint for a blog post, you'll see down here, we have all the properties, right? Image, text, title, but towards the bottom we have something called the slug. And the slug is like a unique identifier for every post on the back end that's separate from the database identifier. So generally speaking, you don't want to expose the database identifier. That's a bad idea. So what we want to do is use the slug instead as our unique identifier. And if you look at a lot of traditional blogs today, like a WordPress blog, you'll see when you click on a post, towards the end, you'll see a string that resembles the title. And sometimes there's a bit of a hash at the end. And that's essentially what the slug is, and that's what it's used for. So we need to go ahead and create another page with its corresponding route using this slug as our way of identifying which post to render. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to turn off the server for this, so Control C, because we're not going to have to go back into the backend code, the Node Express code, and make some changes. Specifically, we're going to add a route, a new page and a new route. So here we have our Node Express code base, and you may recall in the views directory is where we store our templates. So we're going to create a new template for the post page and then connect that template to a new route and then test it. So let's go ahead and do that. So we're going to go to the views directory and create a new template called post.mustache. So remember, Mustache is the templating engine which we'll be using to help facilitate this process. And inside here we have an empty file, obviously. I'm going to just grab the home.mustache and copy and paste it in here. And I'm going to remove all the React code. So this is the post template. And let's remove this React code. And now let's go to the routes folder, and inside the page route is where we defined our routes, which currently is only one. It's the home page route. Let's create another route. This is going to be a get command, and this is going to be post. And then we want to add another value here, but it's going to be prefixed with a colon, and then we're going to call it slug. And the colon has a special meaning, which I'll explain in a second. Let me just finish this real quick. And then we pass in the request and response handlers. So here, what we're saying here is that the word post must be in the path in order for this route to be accessed. But here, this is a variable which we can access from the request object. and that variable will be reflected by whatever the user types in to the URL bar. So that's going to be const and then slug equals rec, and this is called a parameter, a request parameter. So params and then slug, and then we can render the post template like that. And we don't actually really need the data. I just left that behind here out of habit. I just sort of forgot about it. Technically, we don't need it. So we can go ahead and test this route right now. It should render this template called post. So let's go ahead and test that. So here is the server. Let's run the local server again and head over to localhost 3000, and that looks the same. And if I do post and then a bunch of random characters, it should say this is the post template. And no matter what I type in here, if I do 123 123, it'll show the same template, but this value here can be passed into the template. So if I do const post, and then that will be slug equals slug. So I can pass in the post data like that. Whoops. Like that. And the post data object has one key, slug, and whose value is the parameter. So that can then be accessed in here. This is the post template. The current slug is, and then we can do that. Now this double curly brace is confusing. This is a mustache templating syntax, as opposed to the JSX we've been using on React. So keep in mind, we're not doing React code right now. We're just doing regular HTML and some templating engine stuff. So right now we're doing mostly backend stuff. So if I reload this, it'll show the whatever slug value the user types into the URL bar. And so now what we want to do is, if we head back to the home page, we want to link these hyperlinks to that. Actually, we can test it right now by clicking on this. Oh, we didn't link it yet. Okay, so let's go ahead and take care of that. So we're going to have to head over to the posts component, going back to the React code, and then let's find those hyperlinks right here, and let's replace these with the route that we just created. And I'm going to copy this and reuse it because it's going to be the same. So don't forget, every post has a slug, and we can just use that to define the route for all the links that we need. So here I just connected all the hyperlinks to the route that we created. So now these actually should go somewhere, but I forgot to run Webpack, so let me go ahead and do that. Okay. So now when I reload the page, these are now connected to the post route that we set up. And you can see how this is reflected inside the actual template. And that's good. That means we're passing the data from point A to point B. And that's what we want. So now let's go ahead and I'm going to leave the server on for this. And then let's go ahead and actually, no, I'm going to turn everything off because I'm going to create some new React modules. So now what we want to do is create a React component for an individual post. So this component obviously shows all the posts. We want to create a React component for an individual post. So let's go ahead and head over to the SRC and then the components. And then let's create a new component called post. And then head back to the root directory so we don't forget. And inside here, we're just going to create a very simple React component like we did before. And that's going to be called post. It's going to extend the component module. And don't forget, it has to override the render command. And here, I'm going to say this is the post component. Now we're not going to mount this code directly because there's only one entry point, and so what we're going to do is just export it like we usually do. So let's export default post. And then what we want to do is import this component to the entry point. So here we just add another one, post. So now the post component and the posts component are both in the entry point. If I run the Webpack, I have a clean run here. I'm going to run the dev server. And then head back to the home page, and I should see this. Now, when I click on this, it's still going to show what we had before. That's because the post template right here is still just regular HTML. Right? It's not mounting any React code at all. So if I take the home mustache and I just copy and paste it into the post template, I'm now mounting the React code, the same React code onto the root div. It's rendering the same code. Unfortunately, it's going to be the exact same code. So we're going to get all the posts, even though we're looking at an individual post route. So this isn't working quite the way we want. We want this to show only one post, not all of them. So what we need to do is head over to the entry point, the index.js, and the problem is no matter what, we are rendering the posts every single time. And that's not what we want. We need some way to differentiate when we want to render the posts component or the post component. So this creates a bit of a dilemma. So what we're going to do is we're going to head over to our page.js route, and we're going to pass some data through. So I'm going to change this to data, like that, data. And I'm going to change this to post, and we're going to take a JSON object and pass in the slug like this. Now this is a little bit confusing, but you'll see exactly why we're doing this in a few moments. Basically, we're taking the data object, we're taking a data object, and we're assigning one key to it called post. And that key will have a value, a JSON object itself, with only the slug inside. And then we're passing that data to the template. Right now we're not doing anything with it, so it doesn't matter. But if we head over to the post.mustache, and again, if I reload this, it'll look the same. Nothing will change. But we can now take advantage of the mustache templating engine to pass that data. So I'm going to create another script right here and take the window object, which is comes with every HTML object, and I'm going to create a post variable like this, and then it's going to say post. Now what's happening here is that the page route is taking a data object, it's assigning a data object and giving it a post value, which is then being passed into the template. And then the template is grabbing that post value. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to do that. Is grabbing that post value and passing it off to the window. So if I reload this, it's going to look the same again. But if I look at the actual source code, you'll see that there is a post object right here. And notice how the slug corresponds with the slug from the URL. And so if I click on this one right here, it'll do the same thing. If I look at the actual source code, you'll see that there's a post object being binded to the window and whose JSON has a slug value which corresponds with the URL. So now this post value can be passed into here to the entry point, and that's what we're going to do right now. So we go back to the entry point of the React app, so src index, and right here we can grab the post, const post data, and then we can just grab that from the window. And that's 2 underscores post 2 underscores. So we're just grabbing this object right here. And then over here on the component did mount lifecycle method, we can just reuse that. We can check what that post value is. So post equals JSON stringify Now remember, a JSON object itself isn't a string, so we have to stringify it in order for it to be readable in the console. So now if I notice I'm here, I'm on a post path. So if I reload, it says post equals React is great. And if I click on the first one, post equals getting started with React, and that corresponds with this. Now if I go to the home page, this should return null. Undefined, same thing. So that means there is no post defined because on the home template, we're not defining that at all. So here, that window object isn't defined at all. So we can take advantage of that to see whether and which UI to render. So if the post data, so here, if let's create inside the render, let's create a UI object, user interface, and set it to null. And if the post data is null, then the user interface is going to be the posts, because that means we're on the home page. And then else user interface equals the individual post page. So hopefully that makes sense. If there is no post data defined, that means we're on the home page. And so we want to render the posts. If the user interface, if the post data is defined, we want to render the individual post page. And now the user interface is what we want to return. So I'm going to create a div here, and we want to return the user interface rather than just the posts every single time. So this is a bit more conditional. So if I go reload the home page, here I get all the posts, and then if I click on this, now I get, this is the post component, and this is the post component is showing up right here. So now that is successfully going from one component to another, depending on the data that's being passed through. So here we're really taking advantage of using Node Express in conjunction with React and making life a lot easier in terms of how to render the objects, the components. I'm going to get rid of this because we don't really need it. It was just for illustration. And as I was saying earlier, this is only one way of doing things. There are many ways this can be achieved. Another way is using React Router. Another way is doing what's called code splitting. A lot of these are more advanced techniques, and I'm using something simple here for the sake of making sure this is a beginner tutorial. But this does achieve the objective. And so now in the next video, what we're going to do is fill this out so that it actually does show all the contents of an actual post. So, so yeah, hopefully that makes sense. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Hello, and welcome back to our React with Node and Express tutorial series on Turbo 360. In the previous video, we set up a dedicated post component in order to render an individual blog post with all of its relevant content, the image, the text, and whatnot. And then we created a separate route for it on the actual server side so that we can route that request to another template and render the components accurately. So in this video, we're going to actually fill out that component and render the actual blog post itself that is unique to that route. So hopefully that makes sense. Let's get started. So here I am at the end of the last video. The server is actually still running and Webpack is actually still up. So let's go ahead to localhost 3000, and here I'm going to go to the home page, and we have our two posts, and if I click on each one of these, they go to their own pages, and but nothing really shows up, right? It's just this is the post component. All that confirms that the routing works, right? So let's actually show the full blog post. So if you recall, going back to the page route, we passed in a post object right here, which only has the slug, and that's the only piece of data we pass through. Well, there's really no reason why we couldn't pass through the entire post. For example, if we query the API for the entire post, we can grab it and then pass in the entire thing into this object, into the template. And here, if I do an API call for all the posts, I get them all right here. But if I grab the slug of really either one, so if I grab the slug and I do question mark slug equals and then the slug value, I get only the post that matches up with this slug. And if I put in a slug that clearly doesn't exist, it'll give me an empty result set. So we can conduct this query, this actual query, API query, on the route, this route right here. And that's done directly through the controllers right here. So the controllers object is this object right here, this directory right here, which consists of 3 files, but it's really just 2. The index is just a manifest. And we have a post and a video controller, but we're only using post in this tutorial. And inside the post controller is where all the CRUD operations are handled. The get requests, the get by ID request, the post for creating a post, and the put. And this is all set up to go and ready to run. You're free to make changes, obviously, but we can just go ahead and use what's in there by default. So what we want to do is use this get request right here and pass in a params object, which corresponds to the slug. And that's pretty simple. If you look at the controller's index, you'll see that it exports only 2 keys, post and video. But again, we're only using post in this, so this is going to be even simpler. So we go back to the page.js, we grab the controller's index, head back down here, and actually I'm going to comment all this out so we don't mistakenly run it. And we're going to do controllers, and then we're going to grab the post, because remember it exports the post controller underneath the post key, and then we're going to run the get command, and that is this command right here from the post controller, which takes a params object. So that takes a params object, and all we need to do is pass in the slug as the key value pair. And this will run literally this query right here. And so what we want to do is set up the promise sequence. And this is another reason why the MERN stack is becoming so popular, because you may have noticed we're using a lot of the same sort of coding paradigms on the front end and the back end. And that makes life a lot easier when it comes to working client side and server side. So this actually should be posts. So this is going to return an array of posts, just like it does here. You see that's an array. And hopefully that array is 1, but it might be 0 because maybe the slug doesn't exist. So if the length is 0, whoops, that's a mistake. This means the post is not found. Post not found. So here we want to throw an error. So again, you may recognize this from the front end code where we threw errors on the React side. And then on the actual error, we want to return, I'm going to return a JSON object, which is simply going to say failed confirmation and a message. And that error message is assigned right here. And we're just passing it through here. And then what we can do next is render the post template just like we did here, but now we can take a data object. We can grab the post first. So the post is I'm just going to assume the first one from the results set. And then we want to then take that post and stringify that into the data object like so. So I went a little bit fast there. Hopefully that made sense. So we're going to take the results set, which is an array, and just grab the first one. And that's going to be the post that we are looking for. And then we're going to create a data object here, which is going to have only one key, post, which is the stringified version of the entire post, and then we pass that data to the template like so. We're basically passing the same thing as we did earlier, but now we're passing all of the post. So here, when I go to the home page, everything looks the same. When I click on this, whoops. Okay, so what did I forget here? So, oops, I'm sorry. This is not a object like that. This is CTR. Okay, my apologies. These are classes, and we have to instantiate a new instance of the class and then run the get like that. So it would make more sense if I call this post controller like so. That would be easier to understand. So we have to instantiate a new instance of the controller, and then we have to run the queries. And the way you can see that is if you look at the controller, you'll see that these are classes, not just regular JSON objects. So that's a silly mistake on my end. So what that means is you have to instantiate a new instance of the class and then run your queries. So let's reload this. And now we have, this is the post component. Nothing has changed, right? But actually a lot's changed. If you look at the actual source code, you'll see the entire post now being embedded inside the window post object. And this now means we have all the post data that we need to pass off to the React component so that the React component can do whatever it needs to do. So that's what we're going to do next. So now we head back to the React side. So now we just did some server-side code and we took advantage of some server-side functionality there. And now we're going to head back to the React side. So here inside the components, we have our post component right here, and then we also have the entry point right here. Now, in the entry point, if the post data, this is the entire post data now. Now it's more than just the slug, it's the entire post data. So if the post data is fully defined, then inside here we can pass off a property to the component. So post equals post data. And now the post will have access to this property. So what we can do is, instead of this is the post component, we can grab the post from this dot props. This time we're using props instead of state. And we're grabbing this post from what's being passed off right here. And then we can replace that text right here with post title. And if I reload that guy, here it is. And now we have the title showing up here. And if I check the other one, so this is getting started with React, so let's try the other one. React is great. So now we have, don't forget, now we have the entire post data. So we can show everything that we need. So here what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the title inside of an header1 tag. And then I'm going to put in the date string. Let's go with a span for this. Date, whoops, sorry, date string. And then I'm going to render the entire image. Post image. And let's see how that comes out. I mean, it came up. It just doesn't look very good. So let's fix all this. So we have I'm going to put the span over here. Put the image right there. A little bit better. And then let's take the p tag. And let's set the post.text. And here's all the text from the post. You may notice it's showing up as raw HTML. The HTML is just rendering as plain text, which we don't want. So actually what we want to do is we want to set the inner HTML and I believe that is dangerously set inner HTML post text. This is probably wrong, so let me just check it real quick. Actually, if it's wrong, Webpack will have crashed by now. Okay, let's see what happens. Yeah, that did not work. Okay, let me just find it real quick on Google. So, React. Yep, HTML should have been fully uppercased. And I spelled inner wrong, so there's a couple mistakes here. I'll probably just copy this. As you can tell, I don't use this property too often, so sometimes I need to just double check. Okay, here we go. Now we're seeing the code rendered as pure HTML. So this is how you render code in React as pure HTML. So dangerously set inner HTML, double curly braces, and then double underscore for the HTML key, and then the actual raw HTML string. So this is a little bit confusing, but again, it doesn't really come up too often. So this is one of those cases where you want to keep that in mind. So now we have the entire post data showing up right here. So if I go back to the home page and click on the other one, I see all the post data showing up over here. And this data was passed through from the server side right here. And then the React code takes over. We passed it off as a property to the post component, and then we rendered all the data right here directly. So hopefully you got all that working. I went a little bit fast on this one, so please bear with me. And if you have to go back and rewatch some of it, I recommend you do so. But everything is working properly here. And so our blog is taking a little bit more functionality. So everything looks good. Let's see. And like I was saying earlier, there are many ways this can be achieved. And I deliberately chose one of the easier routes because I consider this more of an intro tutorial. So the other ways this can be done is using React Router, doing what's called server-side rendering, things like that. But this I consider this to be pretty simple simple enough for beginners to wrap their head around. So hopefully you got that working. And in the next video, to finish this up, what we're going to do is deploy the code to our staging server on Vertex, which you get for free when you create a project on Vertex. And we can then make sure everything works on an actual server as it does on local. Obviously, that's more important to make sure things work on an actual server. And that will be the wrap up to this tutorial. So hopefully you got all this working. And yeah, thanks for watching. Hello, and welcome back to the React with Node server tutorial series on Turbo 360. In this part, we're going to finish up by deploying our project to the staging environment on Vertex and making sure everything works on the server as it does on the live server as it does on localhost. And that should wrap it up. So let's go ahead and get started. So here we are at the end of the last video. I'm going to run the dev server and just run through the project real quick, make sure everything still works. And here's the home page, here's the individual post page, and here is the other post, and everything looks good to go. So now we're ready to throw this up on the staging server and see it work live, hopefully. So we're going to use the Turbo CLI for that. So you may recall in video 1, the Turbo CLI I explained connects your project locally to the staging environment on Turbo. You may be wondering, why is it called the Turbo CLI if the staging environment is Vertex? It's a little bit confusing, I understand that. That's because Vertex and Turbo are sister products. They work together. And basically Vertex is just a simple way to create projects that can be cloned into other accounts, like here. But Turbo is a more lower level, just create a project and deploy. So they're all working off the same environment, and that's why they have the same name. So here we're going to do Turbo, and then you might have to log in. So make sure you log into your account that you used to clone the project in video 1. So here I am logged in, and then do a quick Turbo deploy. Make sure your Webpack isn't running. And then that's it. And when the deploy is complete, it gives you a staging link, a staging URL to your project. So we should be able to head over to that staging link now, and hopefully we'll see the same thing as we saw on local. So here I am on my staging link now, and if I click on Get Started with React, I see the same thing as before. React is great, same thing, and yeah, that's it. So everything now works on the staging environment as it does on local. Everything is properly working in both environments, and we did a lot of Node Express code in conjunction with React code to make our project work seamlessly together, and so that's good. So if you got all that working, give yourself a pat in the back. It was a good thing to do as a beginner. So definitely it's a good start. If you're interested in finding more React tutorials like this and more advanced ones where we use more sophisticated techniques like React Router and server-side rendering and stuff like that, head over to turbo360.co, and I'll be adding more tutorials over here. And also head over to vertex360.co and check out the community page on Vertex 360. So if you check out the community page and check up on Turbo 360. I'll be adding more and more tutorial templates here where you can use these to follow tutorials and create your own templates and create your own projects that can be cloned by other people and even sold if you want to monetize your templates. So that's it. Hopefully you got everything working on your end. Please feel free to shoot me any questions in the comment section or via email, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. And thank you very much for watching this tutorial, and good luck with your React studies.